In 1935, Alaska became a U.S. state. Since Germany lost their colonial possessions after World War I, who got their African colony? Well, they kept it as it was forgotten in the Treaty of World War I, and even though mainland Germany was under Nazism, the Tanzania colony was still under the German monarchy. In 1936, due to the Great Depression, a civil war started in Colombador. Communists popped out of Bogota and began to take over Colombador. Not wanting communism to spread to North America, the USA took over modern-day Panama and Costa Rica. While they occupied it, they started work on a canal called the Panama Canal, which gave people jobs, recovering the U.S. economy a bit. By the summer of 1936, or winter since this was in South America, the communists took full control of Colombador except their land in Minebers, which they relocated their resources to, ending the war. The communists created the Socialist Council of Bolivar. Around the same time in La Plata, the country was forced to be split into two pieces as the government could not maintain the west due to the Andes Mountains. The part east of the Andes became Argentina and the west part became Chile. East of Argentina, the British colonized some islands. The islands they colonized and named were the Falklands, South Georgia, and the Sandwich Islands and the McDonald Islands. In 1939, Nazi Germany began the invasion of Poland, starting World War II. Poland fell in a week, due to the fact that they didn't have many tanks, so they had to use horses, which didn't go too well. Next, Germany annexed Austria-Hungary. Nazi Germany's next target was France and the Benelux countries. They quickly took them, but France was a bit harder, but soon they fell like the others. Germany was only able to do this with the help of Italy and Japan, but the opposition, known as the Allies, had the British, French, Dutch, Belgians, Polish and all British Commonwealth members too, but it clearly wasn't enough. While Europe fought, so did Asia. Japan was invading the Qing dynasty while Nazi Germany was invading Poland. Of course, Japan took much longer as the Qing dynasty was huge and more powerful than Poland. By the time Germany finished taking over France, Japan owned all of the Qing dynasty, Tibet and Annam. In the following months, they took the Philippines and Dutch Indonesia too. Back in Europe, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, to block off the Baltic Sea and to get iron from Norway. They took over all the Balkan countries too, plus they started invading into the Baltics and Ukraine. Somehow, the Byzantine Empire, Sweden, Finland and Switzerland all stayed neutral. In summer of 1941, Nazi Germany began Operation Barbarossa, which was a plan to invade into the USSR. On the African front, the British took the Italian colonies, allowing them to begin invading into the Italian peninsula, but they were quickly repelled from there. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, which was in Hawaii, which the British sold to the Americans to get extra money for the war effort. This caused the USA to join World War II on the Allies' side. The USA helped liberate lands from Japan and Nazi Germany, turning the tide of the war. The European liberation started with D-Day, which was an Allied landing in Normandy. Thanks to the USA, Italy fell in 1943, and switched sides to the Allies, and many Italians began to fight on the front lines on the opposite side. This also allowed the Soviets to begin pushing Germany out of their lands. However, the Soviets were very brutal to their war prisoners, so lots of Germans fled west to get captured by the Western Allies. By 1945, it was clear Nazi Germany would lose, so the leader of Nazi Germany fled the country and Germany surrendered. However, Japan kept fighting, so the USA developed a weapon the likes of no one had ever seen before and dropped it on Japan. It destroyed southern Japan and even some of Korea. It was called a nuke. Finally, World War II was over. The peace treaty stated that Italy's regime would be replaced by a democracy, that Austria-Hungary would be back, the Soviets would take over Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Königsberg would become part of Prussia, which would be reformed, except with only the Königsberg area. The Balkan nations would become a nation called Yugoslavia, which would be communist due to the Soviets wanting that. Germany would lose land to their neighbors, but the remaining land would be given back to the German government exiled in Africa, which would make Germany a democracy. Japan would be restricted to their home islands. Korea would be divided into a communist north and a capitalist/democratic south. So would China and Annam, which was renamed to Vietnam after the division. The Philippines would be given independence, but the Dutch would keep Indonesia. That was the end of the peace treaty. Now that World War II was over and Germany was defeated, you'd think it'd be pretty peaceful. Well, no. After World War II, the Americans and Soviets started to build more nukes as they thought the other was a huge threat, as the USA was capitalist and the Soviet Union was communist. This was the beginning of the Cold War. The USA started to encourage people to make companies, so lots were created across the USA. There was McDonald's, Walmart, Burger King, KFC, and others. In 1950, North Korea, backed by the Soviets, began an invasion of South Korea. They reached Seoul very quickly and took it, but then, reinforcements from Europe and the USA started to arrive, and they pushed North Korea back. They got to the North Chinese border, who joined the war on North Korea's side soon after. In 1952, the war ended with no clear victor and the border remained practically the same. In 1954, to combat communist influence, the USA created a new alliance called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. It included the USA, Canada, the UK, France, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, Denmark, Norway, Germany, and Twobbular land. You might remember Italy had a colony in South America that hasn't gained independence yet. Well, it was given to the Socialist Council of Bolivar after World War II. In response to the formation of NATO, the Soviets created an alliance called the Warsaw Pact. The members were the USSR, Poland, Yugoslavia, North China, North Korea, and North Vietnam. In Pan Am, in the city of Quatro on the west coast, the Soviets caused unrest that led to a communist revolution. The rebels were the Communist Federation of Pan Am, and they began to take over Pan Am. The Civil War ended with a communist victory in 1958, 2 years after the war started. The Communist Federation of Pan Am, or the CFP, soon joined the Warsaw Pact. In Havana, another communist revolution broke out. The rebels took over the island of Cuba and the Bahamas but made peace with Spain after that, creating the communist nation of Cuba. However, the Bahamas didn't want to be part of Cuba, so they seceded and made a capitalist state instead, better for tourism. Let's go back in time for a second. In 1948, the British gave Israel independence, and they decided to become a democracy instead of a kingdom like they have been for centuries. In 1959, due to Soviet pressure, Prussia joined the Warsaw Pact and became communist. In 1962, the Soviets placed nukes in Cuba, and because they were in Cuba, the nukes could destroy the capital cities of the USA, Mexico, and Twobbular land, and lots of other cities too. This was the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviets placed nukes in the CFP too, so the west coast of the USA and Canada could be destroyed.